All right, so welcome to the Where To From Here. It's the final session. So it's lovely to see so many of you here. There's quite a few that have, I think what happens for people is suddenly the last one comes up, and so everybody wants to be in the last session. So we've got quite a few people joining today. So for the next 90 minutes, I'm going to have the honor and the privilege of taking you through something that has come through the work that I've done of interviewing people. I explain how I got to the research findings and share with you what the research findings are. It is certainly work that I've had a great amount of honor in putting together, and I feel quite privileged and joyful to be able to share it with each person. It is quite full. I am going to let you know that there is quite a lot of content for us to cover in the next 90 minutes. Everything that I go through and all the various themes are all ones that could form a day-long workshop by itself. So please hold that in mind, that this is a sort of tip of the iceberg introduction to give you various aspects. So I encourage you to have a piece of paper and a pen with you and to make your own notes as you go through. And I will pause at various points for questions. But there may be a chance afterwards for us to connect as well. So I really encourage that. As I said, I am recording today's session. It is the only one that I have recorded, and so there will be the opportunity for you to get access to that as well. I am also going to encourage you, please, to use the chat box. So you are welcome throughout the session to share your thoughts, your comments, your insights, your awarenesses, anything that comes up for you, and even your questions in the chat box as we're going through. So I will keep that front and center. So if there's something there, I will honor those questions and answer them as we go along. So the Where To From Here research project is one that I'll tell you a little bit more about its origination and how it got to it. If we could ask, I think, everybody to go on to mute. I think Margot, I'm not sure if it's, there we go, everybody's on mute. So if you can keep yourselves on mute whilst I'm talking, that would just be helpful to everybody. Okay, there seems to be people joining continuously. So the Where To From Here research project is something that flowed from a desire for me to really get involved in human stories. And I'm a big fan of the human experience and truly understanding the human experience for myself and for others. And I think we forget, and it's a premise I'm going to start this off with, I think we truly forget what a transformative time we're living through. We kind of all really have just adapted and are coping and doing what needs to be done. But the truth of it is we're going through a time and in space on Earth that is profoundly transformative, disruptive. And with that comes lots of opportunity. And with that also comes lots of pain. And so we really have this great and amazing chance to pause. And just in the pausing, pay attention to what's going on. And I think the Where To From Here research project for me has been, let's just pause and capture and just pay attention to what is going on. I am going to share my screen for those that have you just recently joined. Welcome. Please feel free to share thoughts and comments in the chat box. As I said, I will have it open the whole time so I can see you there. Let me just get this all set up. And then you should be able to see the slideshow in the screen. Everybody can see that. If you can see it, you can just nod, or you can say it's all good. Right. So Where To From Here started as an idea at the dining room table with my partner, Eric. And I was sitting one morning and I was blabbing, I suppose, as I do sometimes. And I kept saying, I really know a lot is going on. I have a deep intuition around what that is for people, but I'm needing to get away to find out more. And so I coined the term, WTF, which obviously captures a lot of the what the fuck, and Where To From Here came from that. And both of these things are really important principles. And that birthed the Where To From Here research findings project. I didn't expect it to turn into what it's turned into, I really thought I'd have 4 or 5 people show up and chat to me, but that has not been the case at all. And I'll take you through a little bit more of that. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Taryn Sido. A lot of people find my surname difficult to pronounce. I don't mind how you pronounce it. I am a coach, and at the heart of me, I'm a healer. So you've got to hold that in mind, that I have a very deep passion for creating space for people to be the best version of themselves and to heal themselves. Just want to let these people in that are still joining. And so I believe healing is an opportunity that we all have in each moment. And healing for me is really about returning to wholeness. And so the company that I run, called Lightwalker Consulting, which is a coaching and training and consulting company, is dedicated to what I call bringing the life force back into the workforce. It's important to know, I do really, really strongly believe, and have always believed, that work is not supposed to be something we just survive, that we just go to and struggle through to make enough money so that we can put our kids through school and hopefully reach some kind of semi-sane retirement. I really believe work is a place for us to contribute, a place for us to show up and be the most authentic version of ourselves. And so I'm disturbed by how many people hate work. And I'm disturbed by how many people find work a place of suffering. Because I think if we can own that as leaders, how do we then transform work to be a place of suffering to a place of grace, a place of love, a place of wholeness, a place of humanity and connection? So please hold that in mind, that that is a premise. It is an underlying core assumption through which the research project has gone through. And if that doesn't resonate with you, please don't waste the next 90 minutes of your life listening to me, rather than move on to something that is more valuable for you. The project itself comes from a curiosity. I believe curiosity is the only way for us to grow, is when we engage in conversation, when we engage with people, when we engage with life from a place of curiosity, we get to learn more, we get to discover more. And so everything that's in this project comes from a place of curiosity, and honestly, it has made me more curious rather than answering all the questions I have. So that curiosity led me to putting together this project. And overall, over the period of time, and I'll show you a little bit later when these interviews happen, I ended up interviewing 66 volunteers. So I put out a call to people and said, if you're prepared to give me an hour of your time, I would like to talk to you. I think I actually interviewed over 70 people, but some got lost in the data translation process. So admin sometimes kicks in. So I have the data for 66 people, but certainly interviewed more than that. And what has also been interesting, I'll take you through the profile of these people that I have interviewed. I have also worked with probably about 200 people subsequently in various groups and teams, using the information that has come from this research project, and have found it to be highly validated through the process of working with them. Some of you are on the call today that were willing to give me an hour of your time, and so I thank you. And if you are one of those people, it's really wonderful for you to close the loop yourself and to see where this is translated into. The approach was an hour-long conversation, a Zoom conversation, where I simply asked 4 questions in a very broad way. And that was, what has the impact of COVID and working from home been on you? Been for you, and what has that translated to in terms of the way you're experiencing your life, your work life, and what does that mean you need going forward? And I asked it from 4 dimensions. A physical dimension that encompasses everything from my workspace, my desk, my lighting, all the sort of logistics and ergonomics of that, but also my home, my health, shopping. You know, it was interesting how many people brought up clothes and hair and nails and those sorts of interesting things, and also money and my sense of health. All those dimensions came into the physical well-being. I then asked from an emotional perspective, what has been the journey for you? And that obviously takes into account the sort of emotional roller coaster that we've been through, and I'll share a bit more of that later on. The slides are in presenter mode. Can you not all see the slides?
They're in like slide view mode, like as if you're still editing them view on our side. Yeah.
Great. All right, thank you for Michael for bringing that to my attention. Let's just fix that for you. And let's try it this way and see.
Yeah, that should do it. Yep.
There we go. That's better.
Thank you, Michael. I'm glad somebody volunteered that information before I was 19, so I appreciate that. All right, so the emotional level. So if we just put you all back onto mute, that would be great, so we can eliminate background noise. So the emotional dimension was sort of the emotional dynamics of what has been going on for people, but also a very strong focus on relationships. What has been the impact for you of relationships, personal, friendships, family and colleagues, clients, all the relationship dynamics that have gone on for people. Then from a mental perspective, we know that there's this huge hype around mental health and mental well-being. What does that even mean, and how are people approaching this from a mental dimension? This obviously includes overwhelm, anxiety, stress, burnout, but also creativity, decision-making, procrastination, the ability to feel like I can make decisions and follow through on them. And lastly, spiritual. And spiritual seems like a strange dimension to talk about. Holding in mind that I am a healer, holding in mind that I am about wholeness, spiritual for me is a really important part of people's well-being. And I'm not talking here only about the dimension of faith, whatever that means for people, and that did come up. But this is also my sense of belonging, my sense of meaning, my sense of purpose, my sense of hope in the world, and my sense of feeling that work has a place for me in this. Let me just let this person in here. So those are the 4 dimensions. And as we go through the various results, you'll see those coming up as we go through that. So the 66 people that I interviewed, I need to be very clear, the sample is skewed in some instances, and this is a factor of, I suppose, the people that were wanting to talk to me and a function of the way it showed up in the world. And I sat with this for quite a long time and really gave some thought as to what does this mean for this research. And I think what's important is, as I said, I've worked with nearly 150 to 200 people going through these results, and they are not skewed. So there's been an amplification of the information. But when you're looking at the results today, it's important to know that most of the people that I spoke to are between 41 and 60 years old. I'm very curious about this group here, the 18 to 30-year-olds, and what it means particularly for people that are working for the first time. I think there's a whole world of research and possibility, and there are some people doing some beautiful work in that space. 90% of the people that I interviewed are South African. Well, actually, that's not true. 100% of the people I interviewed are South African. 90% of them are in South Africa. The rest of them are in London or in Chile or in Namibia. So there is a sample of Namibians in this group as well. The sample is predominantly white, so that has an impact. I think that's just a factor of the people that were willing to speak to me. Again, I didn't see a huge distortion in the results between the various races, but just for full disclosure, that's there. And then 76% of the people that spoke to me are female. And I like to believe that's because, you know, the Dalai Lama says the Western world will be, or the world will be saved by the Western woman. So my research amplifies that. No, I'm teasing. I'm just joking around that. It is interesting to note that women are showing up in a very different leadership capacity at the moment. But again, I didn't find a huge distortion between the results from a male to female perspective. So it just gives you a snapshot of who's there. The types of organizations that we looked at is a large corporate. So majority of the people work in large corporates. That is over 200 people, mostly over 500 people. That's important because it shows us the level of complexity that we're dealing with, that when we look at an organization that size, we've got different authority structures and different decision-making processes that happened. And then predominantly in financial services and consulting. Anybody has any questions, as I said, feel free to put it in the chat box. There was a almost equal split in the people that I spoke to between those that are leaders of people and those that are employees. And that showed a beautiful distinction that I think the thing that was most interesting for me is when I spoke to people, leaders of a team and leader of other leaders, they were just so grateful to be listened to. That, you know, there's a lot that's happening for many of the employees, but the leaders are feeling quite unsupported of it. There's a huge expectation of knowing what to do, but not necessarily always the space of support to be able to learn how to do things differently. Surprising, well, it was surprising to me, but not surprising now, I suppose. At the end of every hour-long interview that I had, nearly every single person said they felt better just from having an hour to talk about their experience. And so that was almost like a side benefit that happened for people. 76% of the people work from home 4 to 5 days a week. Yeah. Animals came up a lot. Pets came up a lot. Pets were in the interviews a lot. So there's a huge dynamic of integrating with that. 4 to 5 days a week, and I'll show you the timing of the research now, and that'll give some more context to it. Most of these people that I spoke to have a dedicated home office space, and I do want to amplify that there is a huge distinction when somebody has a home space they're working at and when somebody is working at their dining room table or their kitchen counter or on their bed. There is a definite distinction in terms particularly of physical well-being that happens in that environment. I then asked this question. I asked, would you like to go back to the office full time? And 7 out of 8 people said no, thank you. They didn't say no, thank you. There were a lot more expletives. I had every version of no given to me. Hell no, damn it no, they can't make me. If they force me, I think they won't. It was very, very extremely no. Now, hold in mind that I said full time. So many are very comfortable to go back with some level of flexibility, but certainly not with the insistence of my day is now from 8 to 6 or 8 to 9 or whatever it is, full time at the office. When we started the research, I asked people if you've had COVID or not. 62 of the 66 people said no at that point in time. I asked the question then, have you lost anyone to COVID? And 37% of, or 37 of the 66 people said they had experienced death of somebody close to them or close enough to them to be impacted by COVID. Now, really, really importantly, please have a look at the timing of when I did the research. It was right before the third wave. So everything that I'm going to tell you today is highly amplified after the third wave. Because if we go back to those stats I just showed you in terms of have you had COVID and have you lost someone to COVID, I promise you the numbers are radically different now. In terms of my own experience, my brother-in-law was one of the research candidates that he shared his time with me, and he no longer is with us. He lost his life to COVID 2 months ago. So I know people that were part of the research project that have now had COVID and have lost a lot more people to COVID. And you'll see how that then amplifies the results that we show. This for me is important findings. I had to sit with this information quite a lot and played around with it. I asked everyone, does your organization, does your company, does your team have a wellness program? And about 2/3 of the people said yes. Where there was no wellness program, people were pissed off. So where there was nothing happening, everybody was going, well, you know, they just don't care. There's just not enough time. There's just not enough money or whatever it is. But the very interesting part is I asked the people in the research project, do you use your company wellness program? And 4 out of 5 said no. This, I'll come to the questions that are coming up now. This is profoundly interesting information if you sit with it and you have a look at it, because what I started to do is interrogate, what's this gap about? There's a lot of programs being offered by organizations. There's a lot of communication being offered by organizations. But when I asked people, what stops you from using the wellness program? People were very comfortable with the communication that was being shared with them. But when it came to actually doing something that required a level of vulnerability, like talking to somebody about their grief or their loss or their struggle or their burnout or their stress, number one reason people do not do that, well, there's two predominant reasons. One, I must do it in my own time. So there's no time for me to do that. And two, I end up on a report in an exco session. And the idea that that's a target on my back because I'm not resilient enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not coping, all those sorts of things came up very strongly for people. So there's a mistrust of what people are using the information for. When I spoke to leaders, leaders would ultimately say, I'm not going to use something internal, I have my own people I will go to. And again, that was highlighting a sense of mistrust that I'm not comfortable with what gets done with this information. Fact or fiction doesn't really matter now. It's part of the story. It's the way people are experiencing it. Sophie, so your question, with a demographic, a reflection of the population invited or only a reflection of the people you were willing to chat to? So Sophie, so it was probably more a reflection of the people that were willing to set up an hour to talk to me. I think that that was a part of the dynamic. There were a lot more people that wanted to speak to me, but either couldn't find the time or didn't want to do it during working hours. And that was a boundary that I had, that I wasn't going to do this outside of working hours. And then also at 66, I capped it because, you know, at a certain point, the stories all become the same. There's no more. I'd rather cap it there and do the next thing and target that differently. That's amazing, Anna Linda. So it's interesting. Your point is, when people have used the wellness programs, they always found it valuable. But people aren't necessarily using it now.
Well, from my perspective, having made use of it in the past, it did not really add what I had expected in terms of support. So I was like,
okay,
you know.
Okay. All right. So there's that reflection as well. I think one of the things that people did say is that, you know, most organizations use ICAS or a version of ICAS as a support, but it's a little bit of like out of sight, out of mind. You know, we know you're battling. Can you please just phone those people and go and deal with it? So there isn't the space for honoring the experience, and it's obviously got this stigma attached to it. So that gives you a little bit of a reflection of the kinds of people that I've been talking to and the kinds of things that are coming up. And you can start to pause at this point and say for yourself, like, well, what are you hearing? What is on repeat for you? What are you starting to notice? Just from your own perspective, starting to see what this is bringing up for you. When I sat with the research, I mean, I did all the research, as you saw, in the period before the third wave. And then I sat and have gone through the transcripts and sat with them and have drawn pictures and done thousands of ways to try and immerse myself in what is this about? What came up on repeat? What honors this experience? And there's 5 themes that I've grouped together that emerged from this. And that's what I'm going to take you through for the rest of the presentation. The first theme is, my fatigue is not your fatigue. We know that burnout is a huge, huge thing in the world right now. But I was so deeply intrigued by the idea that every person described it differently, and every person had a different way of navigating it. And so noticing burnout is not a universal thing. It's actually quite a unique thing. And so it doesn't have a universal answer. It has a unique answer to it. As organizations, I really think burnout is becoming a strategic imperative to manage and to work with, because there's an organizational dynamic and an individual dynamic. We'll talk a bit more about that theme now. The next one is the fall of the martyr. And it's my favorite theme to talk about, other than the empathy gap. The fall of the martyr is probably because of, I can see myself in it. This is really, I'm fine. I'm fine. There's no problem here. And I'll talk a bit more about that. The third theme is transaction over connection. And in this theme, we talk about the role of the office and what people are looking for in the office and how we can work with that. The fourth theme is there's no space for time. There's this sort of like, busyness epidemic that's happening. There's a sort of sense of addiction to adrenaline that just drives busyness all the time for people. And the last one is the empathy gap. What do we really do as leaders with what is going on for people? So there's a sense of care, there's a sense of awareness, there's even a sense of compassion to some extent, but there isn't necessarily a knowledge of how to bridge that gap. How do we actually align decision-making and business to be able to care for people in that space? Exactly right, Tushara. There does seem to be that perception. When I talk to people in wellness teams, that's not their intention, but it certainly does seem to be. We need to do something, so we put in place a wellness program and hope that it takes care of things. So at this point, you can kind of notice which of these intrigues you the most, which one resonates with you the most, and we'll go through each of these 5 and give you some more perspective of them. So my fatigue is not your fatigue. Universally, I think every single human being that I work with every day, when I ask them how you are, what's happening, the words that come out of their mouth is some reflection of tired. Yeah. And then the tiredness goes, but I'm grateful. And so we have this relationship between I'm exhausted, but I must keep going because otherwise, I'm not grateful. And so the fatigue really for me was summarized by this beautiful quote from this article by Jennifer Moss. She's got some great articles out in the world. And leaders are tired, and they're tired of leading tired people. When we look at organizations, and this impacts creativity, it impacts the need to actually connect with other people. It's exhausting to connect with people, so why would I bother? I'll just keep my cameras off, it's easier. So the tiredness is a very pervasive challenge. And when I look at the word tired, these are the words that people use to describe it in a multitude of different ways. I'm drained, I'm exhausted, I'm depleted, I'm irritable, I'm anxious, I'm impatient, forgetful, scattered, overwhelmed. You can notice any that connect with you. Numb, confused, and stuck. Every single person I spoke to and every single person that I do speak to uses a grouping of these words to describe themselves at the moment. And all of these lead to different dimensions of fatigue and burnout and different needs of what is going on for people. I think there were about 10 of the people that I spoke to through the research project that were not burnt out. And that in itself became very interesting for me, is the people that were not saying that. What was different for them? And that's what I've put as the leadership opportunity later on, is to share what came up from the ones that were not finding this a place of burnout, a place of fatigue. Exactly right, Margot. And we'll talk a bit more about that now. You'll see how it plays into it. When we look at what does tired mean, we have people across the 4 dimensions. I'm going to take you through various aspects of this. I understand these slides are quite busy. You will get a copy of these slides if you want to at the end, and you can go through them in more detail. But people are physically drained. Typically, people in the research that I did, the Workspace Ergonomics, they were quite comfortable at home. People love their home offices. They much prefer them. They think they're much prettier. That came up universally. I think it's a much prettier place to work than my office. My office is not very pretty. And I say that like it's a joke, but it's a very important thing. Offices are this cold, sterile, in colorless places of work are not something that stimulates people. People loved the natural light. They loved that they could get up, the fresh air. Exactly, Anna Linda, the dogs make it better, don't they? Fresh air. One thing that people continuously complained about throughout the entire research project is temperature. It's too hot, it's too cold, so one of the things offices give us is a regulated temperature that we don't have at home. I have a routine that works well for me. Undeniably is one of the things that people show up as talking about as their biggest challenge. Not having routine, not having rituals, not having a way of saying this is the start and this is the end of my day. Rituals is something we'll talk about a little bit later on, and noticing how people are finding it really hard to know what mode am I in? What am I doing now? And that impacts our sense of boundaries and our sense of ability to switch, which is a really, draining aspect on a mental level. So people universally said that. Most of the people in the research that I did said they're not worried about money specifically for themselves, but they all, in some way, shape, or form, were worried about somebody with regards to money. So my mother, my sister, my brother, the this, the that. There's a definite economic reality that underlies a lot of the burnout for people and tension. And obviously, if I'm earning money, that links to gratitude and also responsibility for taking care for all these people that are economically hurt, and the sort of sense of obligation and responsibility that came with that was draining for many people. And this last one, I get enough movement and exercise. This was a big deal for people. And the thing that turned out for me is it's not the exercise. People were quite happy if they were going to gym or going for a walk. It's the movement. And I saw a colleague of mine said the other day, sitting is the new smoking. And so the lack of movement through my day, just sitting from meeting to meeting to meeting, not having the walks between meetings, were a very big thing for people. All of this was leading to some kind of drain. Emotionally depleted. I'm again not going to go through everything here. I think the one that is most important is I'm able to set and maintain healthy boundaries. I talk about this as my boss is in my bedroom and my children are in the boardroom, and so everything is a little screwed up and I don't know how to manage that. I don't know who to say no to. I don't know what to say no to. I'm just doing my best to cope with all of it. Boundaries, bosses sending emails on Sunday afternoons, knowing that you can quickly do that. The green light on Teams, checking if everybody's online and monitoring hours. All of these things came up, and I'm able to set and maintain healthy boundaries. People universally said they have good relationships, a lot of love and support personally, but universally said they don't feel connected to people. So I found that a beautiful reflection. There's a lot of love and support around me, but I'm feeling very disconnected. And that's a sign of emotional depletion as well. And no time for self-care, which comes up in one of the other the other research findings. Yes, exactly right, Sharifa. So sick days, leave is a very interesting thing. Everybody's saving up leave for when they can travel again. I don't, when I'm sick, I just work from home. When I'm tired, I just work from home. We don't take time off, so to speak. Mentally overwhelmed. So decision-making has become a very, very big thing for people. Being able to make a decision. People don't trust decisions anymore. If I make a decision to go on holiday, then there's an announcement on TV and that's gone. The leaders make a decision to do this, but suddenly that decision has changed. So there's no trust in decision-making, and it's a really important thing. There's a thing called normalcy bias. That means that we use what's been normal in our life to try and make decisions for the future, and we have no sense of normal. So all decisions are sort of like more amplified and difficult to make for people. And the lack of creativity. The people found that there was just no creativity and solutioneering happening. This is very different to the kind of creativity that we saw at the beginning of lockdown, where everybody was baking and doing art and doing their 1,000 projects. That was a coping mechanism. That's a trauma response to trying to make sense of the world. This is truly feeling like I have the ability to create, that there's something inside of me. Eleanor, that's a beautiful statement that I heard from so many people. I'm living at work at the moment. And then spiritually confused. People felt like, do I really have a sense of meaning and purpose? Is this really all that important? Like, why am I bothering? is the work that I do worth it? You know, I'm busy, I'm grateful I have a job, thank goodness I have money, but really, what's it about? And does it make a difference? And that's normal again, given the level of trauma. A lot of mistrust and a low sense of faith and optimism with life that was leading to the burnout. So these 4 dimensions, the emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual, give you a sort of snapshot of people all have their own fatigue profile. And so for organizations to support burnout, we almost need to start noticing in a team, what's the collective pattern that's going on? Because that starts to become a resemblance of the cultural dynamics that amplify or co-author or get involved in creating that kind of fatigue. And then supporting people with individual responsibility as well as the ability to support them organizationally. Not everybody's looking for yoga. Not everybody's looking for mindfulness. Not everybody's looking for the same thing. There is different things that are needed for people to be engaged again. The leadership opportunity that's come up through this, and remember I said there were about 10 people that were not demonstrating signs of burnout. They all spoke about work-life integration as something they had full permission to explore. That means that they were not trying to balance work with home. They had full autonomy and responsibility for managing their flow of work in their life. So they could align that with their biorhythms. They could take a nap. They could take their child to school. They could do what they needed to do. And the organization was not managing the hours and the workflow, but more empowering them to make decisions about how they showed up and how they worked. And this is a huge mindset of work-life balance being I switch on and switch off and do these things, as opposed to I'm one human being and all my time is my time. And I balance that. I work with how that flows for me. And as leaders, that's a difficult thing to empower because you have to truly empower, not control anymore. You know, there's a statement that says, given the choice, would you rather have control or results? And 90% of leaders would rather have control. So really being able to switch this into a place of integration. I'm going to pause there in terms of this finding and find out if there's any questions or any reflections from anyone around this finding in particular that you're wanting some clarity on or to reflect on. You're welcome to put in the chat box, or if you want to speak, you can do that as well. Have you got anything coming up for you there? All right, so you're welcome to put in the chat box if you'd like to. The next finding is the fall of the martyr. I think for so long we have rewarded sacrifice. And this seems to have been coming up a huge amount. And notice all these themes flow into each other. When we look at COVID coming along in the world and being the disruptive force that it is, in some way it has just amplified what was always there and got us to pay attention to things that were always there and just sort of brought it into focus. And to the extent that we view martyrdom as a sense of self-esteem, we really need to start noticing that this picture is not a healthy way for us to continue creating living our lives and leading people through it. Is this idea that I must be the sort of strong one for everyone around me so that they can get through it, really, really means that people do not have enough space for their own vulnerability. And that, you know, when we look at the wellness program findings, it's amplified by this theme that I'm okay, but I'm worried about everybody else. And, you know, we can go to the old cliche of putting your mask on first so that you have enough to give to everybody. And it is an overused metaphor, but a useful one nonetheless. But this is more a deeper sort of sense of identity, that the only way that I see myself being in the world, the only way that I value myself in the world is through sacrificing something in myself. That can be sacrificing my energy, my time, etc., etc. And we see this as a leadership model. We see people being rewarded for sacrifice. And that is an unhealthy dynamic that is existing. It's a toxicity that breeds in the corporate space. That positivity or toxic positivity as a theme is something that amplifies this. And toxic positivity, if you've never heard about it before, is an emotional dynamic that's coming up a lot in wellness circles about how we bypass our pain with the insistence of trying to be positive and strong all the time. If I came to you and I said, my child died, you wouldn't go, at least you have another one. Or hopefully you wouldn't go, at least you have another one. But somebody comes and they say they're having a tough day at the office, and you go, well, at least you have a job. At least you're getting a salary. We do this to ourselves. We do this to each other. We bypass things, and we've got a lot of grief in the world at the moment, is you must be strong. There's a really, really huge topic of interest around research around a thing called resilience fatigue. Resilience is the idea of bouncing back, and the idea of we must just push through, just get through it, just move on. Is, if we even take the metaphor of bouncing back, it's almost like the trampoline springs are broken if we look at the levels of fatigue. So I don't even know what to bounce back from anymore. And so the sort of idea of not bypassing, but honoring experiences for ourselves and each other. And this is difficult for us to do. It's very, very difficult. And this, underneath all of this, is the illusion of gratitude. Yeah. I should be grateful I have a job, as we've spoken about. And that I should be grateful is not gratitude. That's guilt. It's a sense of martyrdom. It's a sense of like suppressing the truth of what's going on. So we see a lot of people just keep going. They just keep pushing through. But really, it starts to breed more and more disconnect from the emotional well-being. Absolutely, and Linda. Michael, does work-home integration potentially mean really it allows me? Absolutely. So that aligns with what we're talking about. Absolutely. No, it's creating more space for this. These are some beautiful comics that I found from Natalia Labanova that highlights this toxic positivity that we see. You must speak goodness into existence as somebody is falling off the cliff. Yeah, I love this one. Please just focus on the positive of the situation. Discover the gift. And people are drowning. They're drowning under work. They're drowning under emotions. There's a lot going on for people. And this is possibly my favorite. Have you considered taking up yoga? Yeah. And it's this advice that we give each other to try and feel better rather than acknowledging it's tough at the moment. And the really interesting thing about emotional well-being is when we honor it, it shifts. It just needs to be witnessed and heard for it to be. And remember, I said how many people felt better at the end of the conversation just through talking about it. Exactly, Anna Marie, is the idea of being negative, the idea of if I say I'm having a tough day or I'm sad about somebody I've lost, is, the idea that we must be positive and we mustn't be negative. We mustn't, we must be seen as a good team player. All of these things create a sort of sense of performance rather than being in the workplace. Exactly. And this martyrdom thing really, really got amplified in terms of boundaries. The amount of people who would say to me on a call that nobody respects my boundaries, but then they would answer a call in the middle of the interview. That's not somebody not respecting your boundaries. That's you not respecting your own boundaries. The sort of sense of ability to disappoint people is part of the martyrdom thing. Is it okay to say no? Is it really okay to say no? Now, on an individual level, that's quite a difficult thing. It's difficult to say no because you're going to upset someone. So the conflict avoider in us leads to the martyr in us to step forward. What's beautiful to notice, and I've worked with quite a few leaders around this now, and it's a cultural dynamic in organizations, is I've seen many leaders talking about no meeting Friday, weeks off because you've got a week off for this, or please be the boss of your own diary is one that I'm hearing quite a lot of, and your time is yours to manage. But Can you say no in the organization? If your boss invites you to a meeting on that day, I heard a joke the other day that says no meeting Friday means you just apologize before you schedule the meeting now. You just say, sorry, but it's the only time, so can we set this meeting up? Can you really, really say no? Is no respected? Yeah? We almost have a consent violation challenge in corporates where we don't respect people's no. Yeah? I had somebody who said, no, they can't attend a meeting for personal reasons. And the boss said, well, it's an important thing that you have to be here. And the personal reason was their grand's funeral. But the no is overridden. So for as long as you create a culture in your home, in your life, in your organization, in your team, where I can't say no and I can't hear no, we will continue to have a boundaries violation. We'll continue to have the martyrs just sacrificing themselves for the greater good. And so this becomes a really interesting thing to start noticing. Exactly right, Anna Marie. Exactly right. So the leadership opportunity in here is to start noticing the toxic positivity in your environment, to lead with more vulnerability, and I would encourage permission to say no to you. If you as the leader can create a truly safe environment, people can say no to you. They can say no to you about anything. There's no manipulation, there's no blame, there's no, well, you just won't get the reward. There's a way of having conversations that start with no. And we also need to honor that that can't be an aggressive conversation. So language becomes a really important thing here. Yeah. The third finding is transaction over connection. Work has always been a combination of these two things. People have found a lot of meaning and belonging and sense of purpose in the world, not only through the work that they deliver, but by the people that they interact with. And so we have had a workplace that has had these two dynamics creating wholeness, connection and transaction. What's interesting to notice, though, is to what extent was this real connection, and to what extent was a connection because we all happen to be in the same place suffering together, or in the same place together. Just by the nature of being together, I have to connect with you. If I see you, I must say hello to you. I can't tell you how many people said they don't like their colleagues in the conversations that I had. Yeah. So at least I don't have to see them anymore. Yeah. So that means that the illusion of connection was there in the past, and not holistically, I'm generalizing. But the truth is, people long for both. I want to have a sort of sense of purpose to deliver, and I want a sense of connection and belonging. And so this brings into sharp focus the role of the office. People have universally said, working at home, I get more done. I can do more work at home, but I miss the community of being at work. So people, when I ask them the question, do you want to go back to work full time? They don't want to go back to the office to work. They want to go back to the office to connect. That means the office is no longer a place of work delivery. It's a place of community. And if I don't get it at the office, I promise you I'll go to the coffee shop down the road and get it there. People are missing eating together, having conversations together, whiteboarding together. All these things that can be done online are not the things that give the same sort of sense of belonging and connection. People do not want to go back to the office to sit at their desk and be on Zoom all day. People want to go back to the office. And so offices need to be reinvented, redesigned, so that they're more enticing than my dog and more interesting than me sitting with my camera off at home. So this idea of when we go back to the office, everything will be the same is an illusion, because people are not coming back to the office in the same way as they left. They're coming back a little scathed and a little bit longing for something else. And as leaders, we need to reinvent what we use the office for? Why do people come back? And I've spent a lot of time talking to leaders that have managed organizations that don't have offices to understand, can you create culture without office? And the truth is you can. Culture is an experience, not a place. But if you use the place powerfully, you can amplify that experience. But don't rely on the office to recreate connection and culture. It's not going to do that alone. The ability to change connection online is an important thing. And this is one of my favorite findings from the whole research project, is people are craving conversation, not communication. Today is a communication session. It's not what I normally do. I do conversation sessions much more than this. But people want to be heard and seen and spoken to. People want time to talk. They don't want the next meeting, the next communication. That becomes really important as leaders because there are communication tools and there's conversation tools. And as a leader, how effective are you at conversations is becoming a skill. And conversations online. You don't have to be together in person with a person to have conversations online. You just need to put down the agenda and start opening up the connection. And so that brings up this debate that goes on in the world a lot at the moment. It's my support group for Zoom fatigue. I love that. Cameras on or cameras off? If you have a look at the research around cameras on and cameras off, there's a lot of research that shows the pros and cons of both. Cameras on all the time is fatiguing for people in terms of their eyes. It's fatiguing for people in terms of their adrenaline. So there's a lot of research that shows that it stimulates a fight or flight response to have so many people in my space. Cameras off all the time is the new kind of loneliness. Cameras off is called the current level of absenteeism. And what's been shown in the research is that as people are sitting with cameras off, thinking that they can multitask and get meetings done and do their reports, some of you may be doing this right now, you end up very much split in your energy and feeling very lonely and isolated. And so cameras off is a very unhealthy principle to live with all the time. And so as leaders, we actually need to learn to insist on some cameras on meetings for conversations. We can have cameras off for communication. But if you're only doing communication and it's only cameras off, there will be no connection that is going to be built. The leadership opportunity: embrace new ways to connect with your team. Make it a priority. Leaders need to learn how to have conversations online. Leaders need to learn how to engage with people to get them to feel seen and heard and valued. Not just to push the agenda and to get the work delivered, because we will lose loyalty and we will lose energy in a very big way. The fourth, no space for time. I'm sure all of you can look at this and you can say how many of you battle to find the time to attend this session today, even though it might be something that's important to you, something you want to do. There's 15 requests for meetings. There's 1,000 people asking you to do something. There's email, there's your phone, there's this. Even as you sit here, somebody might be trying to get your attention. You might have an email popping up on your screen. 1,000 things are going, pick me, pick me, pick me, pick me, pick me. And you just don't know which one to do. And so you're overwhelmed and exhausted because it pretty much becomes like a who's shouting the loudest kind of thing. So no sense of organization, no sense of priority that is happening. Again, think back to the I can't say no principle that we were talking about earlier. And the truth is we're too busy to be effective. I don't know. I tried a lot of ways to figure out how to do this better than this comic, but I couldn't, so I just used it. Is to some extent things that we could deal with before we sit here now, and this idea of brain fog is a very real thing. You know, and it's not because we're all older, it's because we're dealing with a lot more crap and there's a lot more to try and process. And we're just too busy. We're just too busy to create space. Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response is a space. In the space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. We don't have space in our day. as organizations, we don't value non-performative time. And that's what I mean by space, is there isn't an agenda, a goal, an outcome. There's just a connection. There's just a space. And so we're in a high reactivity mode. Reaction means that we're sitting, reacting to everything that comes along, a high level of adrenaline in our bodies. Reaction is what animals do. Reaction is what we do when we're in survival mode, just trying to keep up, just trying to not piss anyone off, just trying to stay on top of things. And if you want to be in a place where you are humane, we have to move from reacting to creating. And in order to create, we need to create space. People cannot think anymore. They're just doing. And so as leaders, how do we create space? The leadership opportunity in this finding is to schedule non-performative time in your diary, schedule non-performative time with your team. Now, I had somebody attend this session 2 weeks ago, and she phoned me afterwards because she was so excited, because she said, everybody's so drained. She wants to ask everybody on her team to have 2 hours every week that is just their time, just time to pause, time to reflect, time. This is the principle. But then she added the most beautiful statement afterwards. She says, and they must report back on what they did in their time. And I was like, you've just made it performative. You've just made it, with all good intention, to like, will you now relax? And I'll put that on your KPIs too. And I'm going to make sure that you do relaxing properly. Yeah. If we want to make it non-performative, you've got to back off and let it be non-performative. Yeah. But it's a beautiful thing to notice how quickly we want to measure it and make it happen. Exactly right, Margot. So the addictions that we have, not only caffeine, but the uppers and the downers, the things to keep us awake and the things that then to help us calm down, are very big addictions that we saw. So addictions are actually on the rise. We saw that very much on the research as well. So when last did you pause, take space to breathe, to play, to explore, to laugh? This comes back to this conversation, but it comes back to the saying no. All of these things flow from each other. The adrenal fatigue is a very, very big part of the fatigue syndrome, Annalinda. Very, very big part of it. What's fascinating under this aspect as well is that people are craving rituals. One of the biggest losses for us as human beings is the loss of rituals. We've got obviously the rituals on a big level, the rituals of birthdays and deaths and anniversaries and weddings and all the things that exist, church, all the things that exist for us on a bigger level. But people are missing the daily rituals, having a cup of coffee with a friend after a meeting, the sort of space to just have sort of a sense of momentum. What rituals does for people is it marks time. It takes me out of the Groundhog Day feeling. It says it's a way of me knowing it's Friday afternoon. It's a way of me knowing I'm starting the day or ending the day. And so you will notice a lot of people trying to go back to rituals and then are very disappointed because it doesn't feel the same. We need to start inventing new rituals. A ritual could be as simple as, tell me about your morning cup of coffee. They're the silly, strange things we do on repeat as a group of people. It's the stories we have. And so making space and time for rituals is a really important thing. So the leadership opportunity that exists in here is schedule time. It's no productivity. Yeah. For yourself, for others. Yeah. There's no agenda. It's just, let's see what happens. I've had one organization that the leader's been brave enough to put that in place for 70 people, and I facilitate these sessions. We meet every to 4 weeks is 2 hours, and we talk, we chat, play, we laugh. And it's amazing, he says, how productivity is increased because people are feeling better, feeling valued, feeling heard, having a space to breathe in their day. So the last one is probably the one that I feel the most passionate about in terms of what is needed in the world of leadership at the moment. And this is, I called it the empathy gap. It is not dramatic to say that we're going through trauma, that every single human being that you interact with is living through a traumatic experience. If we use the definition of trauma as before something happened, my life was like this, and after it happened, my life is like that. That is a moment in time that redefines me. It's a place where everything gets reevaluated. That is trauma. Some traumas are ones that we're more comfortable with, like getting married or changing jobs or doing things. There's a before and after, but I chose it. And there's an upside, I believe, and so it's all good. But when something happens to me, that level of trauma where there's a before and after moment is far more difficult for me to deal with, for us to deal with. If we just look at a universal level, we've got a before time story. Before COVID hit, my life was like this. If we had sat here 2 years ago, if I had to say to you, by the way, there's a small thing coming called a worldwide, global, international, deadly pandemic, and it's going to just impact every aspect of your life, your relationships, your work, your children, your homeschooling, like everything. You're going to wear masks. You're going to be paranoid about your health. You're going to be worrying about things like injections and all sorts of things. Most people would say, like, what? You're crazy. It came out of nowhere and hit us, and we're coping, and I'll talk about the coping now. But we don't even have an after experience yet. We just have a during right now. We know our before times, and we know what we're living with now. Those are the macro traumas. We add on a whole lot of micro traumas. Micro traumas are, life doesn't, my policies are not working. Something is going wrong here. My child's not coping at school. Just the daily disappointments, the things that are stressful. And then obviously we have the level of death and illness that is happening. I'm sure there's no single person on this call that hasn't faced death in some way, shape, or form because of COVID. This is traumatic. It's not business as usual. It's unfair and cruel to think of it as business as usual. When we have a look at what's going on for people, I can take you through this if anybody wants to, but this is a thing I've called the Corona coaster, where when trauma hits, people go into high reactivity mode. Remember the react to create. In between reacting and creating, we've got a whole lot of coping modes, the addictions, the martyr, the fatigue that we're seeing. And then we have to deal with the emotions, the grief. So think of the toxic positivity that I was talking about. Most people that I interviewed are in this phase. Very few are here. And all of us try and avoid this like the plague. We just want to feel better. So we jump backwards all the time. This is a place of grief. It's a place where we come to terms with the loss. If I asked every single one of you on this call to make me a list of what you miss, you would have a list, even if it's the Starbucks coffee. I asked somebody the other day, what do you miss? And she said, cake. I miss having cake on the birthdays with my tea. That's what I miss. And it kind of summed it all up for her. It sounds like a silly thing, but it's not a silly thing. It's a big thing that underneath it, there's lots of layers of pain. But we try and ignore this and just keep going. Just deal with it. Just be positive. Just be strong. Just be brave. It's happening to everyone. You're not alone. I worked with a team the other day, and one of the girls said to me, she said, there's a challenge when you put mourn on your to-do list. There was another person in that group that said, when you've had to send 7 condolence messages in 1 week, you just go numb. You don't even know what to say to people anymore. The truth is we're grieving. Every single human being is grieving loss of life, and more importantly, the loss of their life. That my life is not the way it was before. And this grief is existential. When people are grieving to the extent that we're seeing now, which we've never really had to deal with before, we could normally outsource it, take 3 days family responsibility leave and just come back and be your best self, please. Or phone ICAS when you get a chance, or go see your therapist, you know, just don't let me see how messy it is. Will you just take it outside of the work environment? We can't do that anymore. There's too many people. There's too much of it. You know? So we have been taught to not talk about a couple of things, grief being one of them. We don't talk about death or taxes or sex, you know, all these things we're not allowed to talk about. But people are grieving. And it's inhumane to expect them to be the same. It's inhumane to just ignore it, to say, I'm sorry about your gran, have you done the report? And I've heard these stories, you know. There is also a very big part of the fatigue part, which is called compassion fatigue. Those that are compassionate and empathetic feel so overwhelmed by the emotion, they don't know what to do for people anymore. I love this statement by Katie Huey. She's got an article called Grief in the Workplace. It says, grief cannot be project managed. There's no process flow to this. Grief is one of the things that requires humane connection. And when we look at people in their work lives, sometimes the only people I'm talking to in the day are my colleagues. And if they're ignoring everything, then I'm ignoring everything. And so we just go around ignoring it, and it just gets suppressed and more painful. And so is there a role for leaders to play in this? I mean, leaders are not therapists. They're not supposed to become therapists. They're not here to be therapists, but they are also human. And leaders are going through grief. And there's people, I'm working with 4 executive teams that have had death within the executive team. That impacts people. I had a team that I worked with the other day, their boss died, and they just brought in another boss, and nobody talks about the boss from before. If you ever wanted more evidence of you're a number, that is it. Yeah. As we need to start getting comfortable with conversations around pain and grief and allowing ourselves and each other to work through it. And so leaders do not need to become therapists, but leaders need to know how to sit in conversations that are different. And so that's the leadership opportunity that exists here, is to develop skills for dealing with grief. What do you say? What do you don't say? And what is the process? What are the cultural norms? What is private and what is secret? What are rituals that support people through death? This, without a doubt, is the thing. And when I do give leaders some of this information and we go through the skills, they are profoundly grateful for the opportunity to know this is what I can do, because I just don't know. I just don't know what to do. Exactly right, Margot, exactly. So that brings us to a reflection point of the 5 findings, the big findings. As I said, I've taken you through all of these things. And so I'm going to ask you, we'll come back to a bit of a conversation now, but to post in the chat, which of these findings has been most eye-opening for you or connecting for you? Which one stands out for you as being something that has brought something into your awareness or touched you in some way, shape, or form today? So I'm just going to give you all a chance to, in the chat box, put that forward. Joanne says the empathy gap. Let's just give you all a chance to do that. Anne-Marie says a bit of everything. Empathy gap, says Candace. All of the Martin, space for time, says Liesel. Bronwyn's also the empathy gap. Hello, Bronwyn. I know you were here. Linda, empathy gap. Hello, Shalane. No space for time, the empathy gap. So much grieving. Joanne. see if a few others are going to put on there what's coming up for you. Fall of the Martyr, says Liesel. No space for time, Fall of the Martyr. Busyness equals busyness. Exactly, Linda. Beautifully said. Oh, yes, Shalane. Yeah. My fatigue is not yours, and the empathy gap. Beautiful. So that's great. Thank you, Joey. So like I said, I'm going to end off the presentation. We can have a bit of a conversation, a chat with those of you that like to. In terms of where to from here for you is that if you'd like to continue to be part of these conversations, I've created a network of light-hearted leaders. I will send you a link in an email, and you're welcome to join that. That'll be a group of people that become sort of more connected in figuring out how do we work through this? How do we lead through this? What are the skills? And you'll be part of a group of people that are all interested in this in terms of what we can do in the world at the moment. You also get a copy of this presentation when you sign up to that. I have actually created a grief training for leaders course. I will send you some more information on that, but please, if you're working with leaders, start to create conversations with them around new skills that are needed. And you know, leadership for me is not about having a team. Leadership is about making an impact. If you talk to people, you are a leader. You are able to be compassionate and work with them through what's going on for them. And I'll send you some info on that if you want. And then you're more than welcome to, I'm doing 3 sessions with different teams and organizations, taking them through these themes and then reflecting on how they shift their culture to be able to work with it better. So let us stop this here and come back to the group as a whole. We've got about 15 minutes left, so I'm happy to take questions and have some conversations with whoever would like to. If you feel like you've seen enough and you are leaving us, that's also perfectly okay. I know that space. You've got 15 minutes, you didn't expect, bargain. I bet you're not going to use it to relax. I promise you, you use it to do emails or something. Exactly, Dot. Anybody got any questions or thoughts or comments? You can just put up your hand or put on your screen, or switch yourself off mute, and I'm happy to take any questions or reflections from anyone. Anybody would like to start that off for us? All these blank screens. You can put your cameras on now. It's nice to see your faces. And Alinda. There's Ushani.
I was mainly just laughing. Yeah, I was thinking kind of on a very personal level initially when you were talking about boundaries. I also found myself struggling right at the beginning. I was working in another country and I had to like pack my bags in the night and sort of flee back home type thing. And it was quite strange. And then I came home and I was like, this is so great. I'm going to make my own like open plan office. And I sat in the dining room and it was like the worst idea ever. And eventually, like, I think within 2 weeks, I was like, no, this is chaos. So I like set up another space with a door and, you know, blah, blah, blah. That's great. And I've had to do the work the last 2-3 years to kind of just learn to be like, no, thank you very much. I'm done with this. I don't have energy, blah, 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 whatever, all of that. But I did observe my husband being almost incapable of drawing a line. And, you know, whatever the causes may have been, I suppose it's mainly past patterns.
Absolutely.
But I am wondering if there's any like kind of generational differences, like maybe the sort of 35s and below are a bit more comfortable with the sense that like, no, it's cool. Like I can't be everything to everyone all the time, whatever. And maybe the slightly older people have that sense of like, it's my duty and I cannot disappoint, you know, that sort of thing. And like at all costs. And I just thought, yo, it would be so interesting to see like more data on that sort of stuff. Sure.
So, I mean, given the research that I've done, and remember it was typically 41 to 60. So definitely within this group of people, the saying no is it's a big thing. It's when I've leaders in terms of like the leading the new generation, one of the challenges for them is the fact that, like, how dare you say no to me? Like, you should just respect your authority and get on with it. And so we override their no's. And so we almost have this perpetual, trying to find permission to navigate life according to my boundaries, and it being overwritten by authority, be that adults, be that bosses, be that, my partner, whatever it is.
Anyone, yeah.
A really big thing. And I think there's different generational belief systems, but hurt nonetheless in that experience of trying to fit in, trying to belong, trying to, navigate things in a way that makes me feel safe. It's a very big topic. And in the world, we have a lot of the Me Too movements, and we have a lot of the, respecting different kinds of people. It's all coming together in the same part of this. It's all part of the same thing. Thanks. Shana, you've got your hand up, love.
Yeah, I think, on the age thing, it's something that really resonates with me, because I've also noticed that when you look at, the working profession that's kind of in their 25 to 30, they're actually much better at setting boundaries than we are. And it's something that has challenged me, because I've almost felt like I've learned a lot from them to actually put some of those boundaries in place, during working from home. And they've been actually quite supportive, and they actually notice a lot more than the kind of 35 to 60s in terms of how you're feeling. They're more open to have deeper conversations. They're not afraid to be vulnerable. So yeah, I think I can say that I've learned a lot from them, even though I still find it very difficult to engage in the same way with my peers and executives.
Yeah, there's I think one of the things that we are learning to redefine is professionalism. We've used professionalism as a way of masking up. If we think of that, Martin, you must be professional, you must be adult, you must be responsible, and then we just hide away everything else, as opposed to, and that leads us to a gap where there isn't a lot of authenticity, there isn't a lot of humane connection. And so learning to unmask and to really connect in a meaningful way is a big part of this. Yeah. Exactly right, Linda. Yeah. Anybody else got any questions or reflections coming up for you? Hello, Tanya. Dot, and then Tanya.
Sorry, I'll just unmute myself. Yeah, so I must say, I obviously work from home. I've got my own company. And the one thing that I realized was a lot of clients then go, oh, but you're working from home, so you're always available.
Exactly.
And I mean, Taryn, David, or of David. And we had a long discussion, and he said, so what are you going to do to help yourself? Because you're always helping your clients, but you're not helping yourself in the process. And it's such a stupid answer, and something that I've really had to work on. It's, you know what? You manage your clients. You tell them when you are available. You tell them when you can have a meeting with them. Because I think there's a big tendency now, oh, you're working from home, so you're always on your laptop. You are always working. So I can contact you whenever. And it actually puts a lot of strain on you as the individual. So yeah, for me, that was a big thing that I needed to work on. And since I've been managing myself, managing my clients, I've actually realized I've actually got more time and not running around like a headless chicken. So that was one thing that I really took out of everything in my personal experience over the last year and a bit.
Yeah.
Just manage your own time. And if you can't do it, it's okay. Somebody actually just mentioned something on the chat box. It's okay not to be okay. Just help yourself. Yeah.
You're right. There are a couple of things that are really valuable around that is that, the always on culture is one that we do to ourselves. Clients can send an email to you anytime they want. Employees, your boss can send an email to you anytime they want. That's theirs to manage. If I want to work on a Sunday, I can send you a message. You don't have to answer. But the expectation that if I, I must be shown to be there and professional and all these things is, one of the things when we work through boundaries is one of the things that I talk to people about is that boundaries is not making other people stop doing things. Boundaries is having a very clear and comfortable, unapologetic way of knowing how you respond to those things. Is I don't need to audit what you do. I just need to know how I want to respond to it. And to set myself up to not have it, because as you know, Dots, if it comes through and you see it, and then for the whole night you're sitting drafting the email in your head, instead of actually just go and do the email, it'd be quicker and easier than just traumatizing yourself for 48 hours whilst you think about the email. But being able to actually switch off and be okay with that is difficult and not only when you work for yourself, almost universally I see it as something going on. Tanya, you had a question. Margaret, you also saying other big change is how we connect to sell our services. I think the whole world of sales is changing hugely. I don't know if Michael's still on here. I think he's dropped off. But certainly sales and selling and being in the sales profession and being able to sell services is a whole different ballgame now. Whole different ballgame. The needs of people, the tolerance of people, everything's changed in that. So also a big thing that's shifting. Tanya.
It's a bit of a reflection on the people's questions on the younger generation. And I think and I think a big part of it is like let's say our parents, the generation above me, was raised with a like toughen up attitude, and someone's got it worse, so get over it, so I think that's the first thing is like the younger people we're like nothing's particularly wrong with me, but I'm going to therapy. I mean, I was talking to someone who comes from quite a strong culture of just toughen up, and even he was like, I've been thinking about going to therapy, and I was like, oh, okay. Good. And I think that's the first thing, like they're putting their mental health forward a bit more, so no, I'm not going to attend that because I know it'll hurt my mental health. So yeah, and I think also the fact that we've gone up in being connected all the time. You'll catch us ignoring messages a lot faster. So we used to like that 7 p.m. text and not feeling bad because that's how it's always been.
It's exactly true. And removing the stigma about going to therapy or getting coaching or finding support or speaking up, apologizing for your emotions, that sort of thing is definitely something that I think many places are trying to shift that stigma, but it only changes when you're comfortable. The amount of leaders that said, their team must go for therapy, but I don't need it. I'm like, have you seen, you've been talking for 45 minutes about how drained and exhausted you are. But so that sort of sense of awareness. Beautiful. Absolutely. And Linda, Slack comes up as a communication or a conversation tool that many of the empowered teams talk about as very powerful, rather than WhatsApp or Teams.
Oh man, I can't even, don't even start. I'll rant on about it for like 3 days straight.
Just to be clear, pleasure, Faye. Email is not a communication tool. Let's just make sure it's very, very, it's definitely not a conversation tool, and it's very, very limited as a communication tool, but it's there as a great tracker of information. Right, so that brings us to the end of our time together here. There's going to be plenty of opportunity for more conversations, so I'd love it if you do sign up to be a part of the network, and then we can take that forward if any of you want to connect around other people that you think would benefit from seeing this, then let's chat about that. Otherwise, please share this with people, and let's get people to open up around what's really going on for each other and ourselves. So thank you very much for showing up and for your time and energy today. It was a great joy to be with you. There's Joanne put on her thing. Perfect. Ta. See you all soon. Have a lovely day, and remember to take a break. Okay. Cheers.
Thanks, Taryn.
Pleasure. Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.